Somebody had run the tape across the arch. 3 strips straight over the bottom of her foot, heel to instep. The middle one, doubled. I've taped a heel maybe 4,000 times, and never once like that. She woke up while I was looking at it and told me I'd done a nice job on it Tuesday. I don't work Tuesdays. I work Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And I have since October. And there is 1 licensed nurse on that hall at night. Inside of 5 weeks, 3 different people would tell me that hall was theirs. I said she was easy to work on. She said I always say that. Then she asked me about a dog we had in 1994. And I let her have the dog. And I stood there in the dark with my phone light on my aunt's foot, trying to figure out whose hands had been on it. Her name is Verna, room 212, window side. She raised me from 11, when my mother went up to Indianapolis and Verna didn't. And that's the entire custody arrangement anybody ever wrote down. She was a school cook for 31 years. She won't ring a call light at night because she thinks it's bad manners to wake somebody up. So I move her water to her left side before I start my pass, since her right shoulder doesn't come up past here anymore. And I turn the chair so she's facing the door. She's never once mentioned that I do that. I'd be embarrassed if she did. I took nights at her building on purpose. Nights are when nobody visits. 11 residents on Hall C, 7 to 7. 9 o'clock pass, call lights till midnight. 2 o'clock rounds and turns. Then the long flat part where you can hear the ice machine drop from the other end of the building. Then 6 o'clock and handoff at 7. I know which of my 11 will ring for a blanket and which one will lie there wet until you find him. That's not a hard job. That's just knowing people. In October, the place went into receivership. What that meant on the floor was that the people who paid us changed, and the new ones run the building from somewhere else. Through a ticket system. You put in a ticket. Sometimes it comes back. The nursing director, who'd been there 11 years, stayed on a little while after and then died in February, which I mention because it comes back around. The dressing was 2 days old by the date on it. Under the tape, the gauze was folded in quarters. I fold in thirds because thirds sit flatter on a heel that's down to what hers is down to. There was a swipe of barrier cream on the ankle bone, about a finger wide, and I wiped it off with the old gauze and thought nothing about it at all. The boot was under the bed. Somebody had bridged a pillow under her calf instead, which is a real way to keep weight off a heel. It's a fine way. It isn't my way, and it isn't what was on her Saturday when I left. At 5:30, I took the whole thing down again, with the day nurse standing there, watching me. Brandy Voges works days on C and does not care for me, because I write long notes and she has to read them. I asked her to come stand in a room at 5:30 in the morning and look at a wound. And she came, which tells you what you need to know about her. She agreed with my measurement to the millimeter. Then she said, on her way out, that whoever's been rotating my aunt is doing it different every couple of days. I said nobody's rotating her but me. She gave me the look you give a coworker who said something that can't be true. And she went to get her cart because she had 31 people waiting, and it was 5:30 in the morning. I stayed for the wound nurse. Deb comes Tuesdays and Fridays and doesn't get in till 7:15, so that was 90 minutes past the end of my shift, unpaid, standing around a building I'd just spent 12 hours in. Deb has a way of talking without looking up. She measured. She took her photographs. She asked me whether the boot was being used. And then she said the thing I hadn't put together, which is that in her records, that heel has been the same since October. Not worse, not better. 4 months of a wound like that, holding perfectly still. That sounds like good news. It isn't. A wound that never changes is usually a wound that nobody's measuring the same way twice. I lost my ride home over those 90 minutes, My truck's been at a shop in Tell City since Christmas, over an alternator I keep not paying for. And I ride in with Charlene out of dietary, who leaves at 7 because her grandkids get the bus at 7:40. She waited 8 minutes. She was right to leave. So I was standing inside the front doors at 20 till 8 in yesterday's scrubs, drinking machine coffee, when Toya Prine came in and asked me, pleasant as anything, if everything went all right on C last night. You learn to hear that question. It isn't an accusation. It's a unit manager noticing that a night nurse is still in her building 40 minutes after his shift and filing it away where those things go. I said everything was fine, which was true as far as I could prove it. And I walked out to the road and called my neighbor for a ride. Brandy is the one who told me. Sunday evening I'd come in early to restock the wound cart out of my own pocket, which I do because supplies are a ticket now, and tickets take 9 days. She was finishing her charting, and she said it the way you'd mention weather. C nights were up on the app again. I asked what that meant, up on the app. She said the block, 7 to 7, Hall C, posts every Sunday. And it's been posting since around Thanksgiving. She only knew because she picks up per diem at a place over in Rockport on her days off, and the postings come to her phone whether she wants them or not. She said the rate on it was a couple dollars under what she figured I made. Then she said she'd assumed I knew. That wasn't fear. I want to be honest about what it was. It was the low, ugly feeling of finding out you're the last person to hear something completely ordinary. My haul, my 3 nights, and a stranger with a phone could take Thursday off me before I woke up. Monday's my day off. I drove back in at 3 in the afternoon. That building at 3 in the afternoon is a different planet. Lights on, families in the lobby, a church group singing in the activity room with the door propped. I went down to scheduling, and April had her door open and a plastic container of something on the desk, and I asked her to take the C night block off the app. She said she couldn't, not wouldn't. She turned her screen around and showed me. The block was entered upstream, corporate, recurring weekly, and what she had was permission to look at it. She could post shifts. She could fill shifts. She could not take down a thing she hadn't put up. She said she'd sent a ticket about it in December and never heard anything back. And she said it in the voice of a woman who has sent a lot of tickets. Then she told me the one thing that was actually available to me, which is that anybody can claim it, including me. So I claimed it, standing at her desk on my own phone the next 3 Thursdays, while she watched and said only that I'd want to read what that does to my line. Here's what it does. Pick up your own haul as a claim, and you're not staffed for those hours. No differential, which is $1.90. No accrual. And my accrual was 4 days toward driving up and getting Verna's sister down from Michigan this spring. And the roster in the break room. The handwritten one taped inside the cabinet door that everybody still runs off of because our assignments never got loaded into the new system. Has a line that says C Nights with my name after it. April said she'd have to pencil me out for any night I picked up. I stood there and watched a woman erase my name off a sheet of notebook paper with the eraser end of a pencil. I paid $1.90 an hour and 4 vacation days for that, and I told myself I'd bought something. Thursday I came in, and the heel was set up a third way. Not the tape across the arch, not my thirds. The boot was on her, snug, correct, and whoever put it on had run the strap through backward so the buckle sat on the outside, away from her other leg. You do that for somebody who bruises her calves at night. It's careful. It's the kind of thing you only do if you've looked at her legs and thought about them. Delphine had the linen cart parked outside 210 where she always parks it, with her chair beside it, and she said good evening to me the way she says good evening to me. I want to be clear about something, because it's the part people get wrong when I tell this. Nobody was lying to me. Not that week, not later. Every person I talked to in that building told me the truth as they had it. And the truth, as they had it, fit together like two halves of two different bowls. There was no one to catch. I'd spent all week telling myself it was one person who'd crossed onto my hall. Standing in that doorway with my hand on the strap, I did the arithmetic I'd been avoiding. I owned Thursdays now. I'd paid for them. That still left Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. 3 different setups in 8 days is not one person. I finished that Thursday shift with my hand going back to the strap every time I passed the door. Around 3 in the morning, I did something I'm not proud of. Verna was awake, which she often is at 3. And I sat down on the edge of the bed and asked her who put the boot on her. She said I did. I asked her when. She said tonight. I said no, before tonight, before I got here. And I could hear my own voice doing the thing where it gets patient and slow, which she has always been able to hear too. She told me she didn't like being quizzed. Then she got worked up about it, in the particular way she gets worked up now, which isn't loud. It's just that she starts apologizing for things that haven't happened. She apologized for being trouble. She apologized twice more before I got her calmed down, and her water moved back where she likes it. And I sat in the hall afterward with my hands on my knees. I'd used a woman with a hole in her memory to try and check a fact. That's what I'd done. There isn't a nicer way to write it in a note. Friday, I came in at 10 till 7, and Sherry met me inside the double doors before I got to the time clock. Sherry runs evenings, and she is about 60, and she is the person in that building I'd call if I needed a ride to a funeral. She said, real easy, that C was covered tonight, and I could go on home. I asked, covered by who? She said she'd have to look, and then she said, go home, Ray, take the night. And she put her hand on my arm, the way you do when you think you're handing somebody a gift. I went as far as the vestibule and stopped to zip my coat. And that's when I heard a woman's voice down the hall by the med room on her phone, saying she couldn't talk long because she had to start her pass. Then she said, my hall's the long one. See, my hall's the long one. I stood there with my coat half zipped and did not go back down that hallway. And I have thought about that a lot since. What was I going to say? I'm the nurse. She's the nurse. There's a piece of notebook paper in the break room cabinet with my name on it, in pencil, and I'd already watched somebody erase part of it. I sat in Charlene's cousin's borrowed car in the lot and called the staffing line, which is a number on a poster by the time clock. A woman answered from wherever that line lives. She was kind about it. She could see the block for tonight, and she could see that it was filled. She could not tell me by who, she said. And I don't think she was refusing me so much as describing her screen. She asked if I wanted to be added for tomorrow. I said tomorrow's mine. She said she'd take a look, and then she said it looked open. 12 hours a night is $180 and change to me. That Friday cost me the $180, and it cost Verna, the person who moves her water. And I'm aware which of those two I noticed first at the time. Annual Competency Day was the following Tuesday. Everybody in the building rotates through, days and nights, and agency both, in the activity room with the folding tables pushed together. Hand hygiene, transfers, fire response, the abuse reporting video that has been the same video since I got my license. You sign a sheet. It's 4 hours, and they pay it at base, which for me now, on Thursdays, is a joke I didn't feel like making out loud. Toya sat down beside me during the break with her coffee, and I asked her plainly, who's been on C? And she told me something true, and it's important that it stayed true. When B runs short, she said, and B runs short constantly, the agency nurse floats. Floating in that building doesn't mean the whole hall. It means the floater picks up the treatments, the dressing changes, the 2 or 3 things that will get somebody written up if they don't happen. She said it had happened at least twice in January. And she could name the nights. And she did. And one of them was the Tuesday before I found the tape across the arch. That fit. That fit so well, I felt my shoulders come down off my ears. A floater, working fast, doing a dressing on a hall that isn't hers, tapes it the way she tapes everything. Quarters instead of thirds, pillow instead of boot, because the boot's under the bed, and she doesn't know that's where the boot lives. Nobody's hiding anything. The system's just short-staffed and leaky, which is not a horror story. That's a Tuesday. I ate 2 of the sandwiches they'd put out, and I believed that for about 40 minutes. The travel LPN was at the far table. Kay Bettis, 13 weeks on a contract from up around Peru originally. One of those people who has worked so many buildings that she compares them out loud like restaurants. Somebody asked her which hall she had. She said sea nights, Sundays, and Mondays. And then she said, without anybody asking her anything else, that she'd finally gotten the lady in 212 to keep a boot on. Floaters don't fight with a resident about a boot over multiple nights. Floaters do the dressing and go. I said, that's my aunt. Kay said, oh, that's nice. She talks about her nephew. She said it warmly. There was nothing in her face I could have objected to. I asked her to come down and look at the heel with me, and she came, because she was on the clock for competency anyway, and because nurses will always go look at a wound. 2 in the afternoon in 212, curtains open. Verna in the chair with her hair done because Tuesday is when the girl comes. I got the boot off, and Kay leaned over it and pointed with a pen at the outside of the ankle and said she runs the strap backward on her because she bruises. And I said, I know, I saw it. She told me she uses quarters on the gauze because thirds ride up. She said the pillow's better than the boot in the daytime, and the boot's better at night. Everything she said was defensible. I've argued both sides of every one of those with people I respect. And there was the swipe of barrier cream on the ankle bone, about a finger wide, same place it always is. Verna didn't know Kay. That's the part I didn't plan for. 2 people she didn't have a name for, standing over her bare foot at an hour when nobody usually touches her. And she got her good arm onto the arm of the chair and tried to stand up. Kay got a hand behind her shoulder before I did, which is fair. I was holding a boot. She said her name and said, we're just looking, sweetheart. And Verna sat back down. Delphine had come in behind us with the linens. She said without any weight on it at all, that Mr. Bose wouldn't take his 9 o'clock without applesauce, and there wasn't any on the cart tonight. And Kay said she'd remember, and Delphine said she'd bring some up from the kitchen anyway. I put the boot back on my aunt myself, strap outboard, the way Kay does it, because it's better, and I knew it was better. So then I had 2. Me and Kay. Sundays and Mondays hers. Thursdays mine bought and paid for. Fridays and Saturdays mine on paper, unless Sherry meets me at the door. And Tuesdays and Wednesdays, some floater doing treatments and going home. That's an ugly schedule, but it's a schedule. I spent that whole week rearranging it in my head, like it was a thing that could be made to add up if I kept at it. Wednesday night, I drove over to sit with Verna. Visiting hours run till 8, but nobody has ever once said anything to me about 8. And I brought her a fried pie from the gas station, because she'll eat those and she won't eat the dessert cups. At 20 till 10, a woman came into the doorway of 212 and asked me who I was. She wasn't rude. She had her card out in the hall behind her, and a pill cup in her hand, and she was doing exactly what I'd have done if I'd found a strange man sitting in the dark next to one of my people at that hour. She said it flat and friendly. Who are you? I said, I'm the nurse on this hall. And she said, I'm the nurse on this hall. Sea nights, Ronnie. I come over from Evansville. Then she looked past me at Verna. And she didn't look at her the way you look at a stranger's grandmother. She looked at the head of the bed to see if it was up, and then at the chair, and then at the water on the left side. And she said, "Is she up too late? She's usually out by 9. She knew the bed. She knew which side the water goes on. I didn't argue with her. I want to say that I confronted her, and it turned into something. But what happened is that I stood up and moved out of her way and asked if I could watch her pass. And she said, "Suit yourself." So I followed a woman I had never seen before through 11 rooms on my own hall for an hour and 10 minutes, off the clock, in my street clothes. And she was good. She was better with 209 than I am. She crushed for Mr. Bose without being told, because Delphine had put a cup of applesauce on the cart, which meant Delphine had known Ronnie was coming, or had known somebody was coming, or had just done what she does every night regardless. 3 sets of hands on one heel in 11 days. And here's the thing I couldn't get around. Standing there watching her scan a wristband. Not one of the 3 was wrong. Tape across the arch holds. Quarters hold. Backward strap is better than my strap. 3 people had taken good care of my aunt in 3 different ways. And every one of them thought she was the one who always took care of her. Toya called me at home Thursday afternoon, before my shift, which she has never done. She'd had 2 staff report a nurse in the building at night without an assignment. She was pleasant about it, and she was completely correct. Off the clock in resident rooms is a liability problem. And she used the word liability, and then she said, "I know she's your aunt, and I know, and I'm sorry. But you're going to have to come in on your nights and visit during hours like everybody else's family." Which took my aunt from 7 nights a week, where I could get to her, down to whatever nights the app hadn't already sold. I said, "Okay, Toya." Then I asked her one thing, because it had been sitting in my chest since Friday. I asked her who decides when I get sent home. She said Sherry does. She said it like it was nothing, because it is nothing. Somebody has to. The first thing it cost me was Sunday. Verna has a thing she does on Sunday nights, where she gets going about the school kitchen, the walk-in that never held temperature, a woman named Pearline who stole her recipe box in 1988. It's the best hour she has all week, and it runs late, and I had been getting it on Sunday nights for 4 years by walking in past the desk at 9 and nobody caring. Toya's phone call ended that. I went the following Sunday at 6:30 like family, and at 7:45 a girl from the front came and told me, apologizing the whole time, that visiting was over at 8. Verna hadn't gotten to Pearline yet. I sat out in the lot after and made myself go through what I actually had. Kay had Sundays and Mondays. Ronnie came over from Evansville and had, by her own account, C nights. Somebody with a fondness for taping across the arch had at least one Tuesday. I had Thursdays because I'd bought them, and Fridays and Saturdays, unless Sherry met me at the door, which by then she'd done 4 times. That's 5 people's worth of claim on 21 shifts. It doesn't divide. The smoke shelter is behind the kitchen dock. A bus stop with a roof on it and a coffee can full of sand. Sherry's out there at 9:40 every night she works, because that's after her 9 o'clock and before the family phone calls start. I quit 11 years ago, and I still know where everybody smokes. I asked her straight. I said, "How many times have you sent me home?" "Since October." She didn't get defensive. That's what I need people to understand about her. She thought about it with her head tipped back, doing arithmetic, and she said probably 20. It might be more. She could pull it if I wanted, but she said probably 20. And she said it the way you'd tell somebody how many times you'd covered for them. I asked her why. And Sherry told me in about 90 seconds. Standing in the cold with a cigarette she wasn't really smoking, the whole thing. Not a confession. She had no idea she was telling me anything, She said the haul gets covered by whoever claims it off the app. And the claim comes in at a rate under mine. And she cannot pay 2 nurses to stand on one haul with 11 residents on it, because the budget she gets held to is hours per resident day, and 11 residents doesn't buy 2 licensed bodies. So when it's claimed, she calls me off. She said she'd rather call off staff than agency, because agency you have to pay a cancellation on it inside 4 hours, and staff you don't. Then she said the part I've thought about more than any other sentence anybody said to me that whole spring. She said, "I've been trying to keep you on the schedule at all, honey. After the changeover half, you all came out of the system. You want me to stop calling you? I'll stop calling you." She thought she'd been protecting my job. She had been protecting my job. Somewhere upstream, there was a block posting itself every Sunday and a piece of notebook paper in a cabinet with my name on it in pencil. And in between those 2 things, there was a 60-year-old woman with a phone list making the only decision anybody had actually authorized her to make, which was don't pay twice. I said no, keep calling me. I said it because I couldn't afford not to be called. I went back inside and finished my night. And somewhere around 2, I stopped thinking about who was taking my shifts. 20 times. Say it's 20. That's 20 nights I wasn't there, and I'd spent 5 weeks trying to put a name on each one like the names were the point. But Kay is 13 weeks into a contract, and Ronnie drives 40 miles from Evansville when the rate's worth it. And the tape across the arch person I'd never even laid eyes on. Not one of those 3 had been on that haul in October. Not one of them would be on it in June. 11 people live on Hall C. Mr. Bose has been there 2 years. Verna's had 212 since before I hired on. And the licensed person standing over them at night had been a different person over and over for 4 months. And every single one of those people had been told the haul was theirs. And so not one of them had ever thought to ask what it looked like last week. That's when it stopped being about my shifts. A haul full of people whose whole medical history at night lives in the head of somebody who won't be there in 6 weeks. The next Thursday, I stopped the pass at 2 in the morning and did head-to-toe skin checks on all 11. You're supposed to get those weekly. They happen when they happen. I did them right, which means gowns off, lights on, 2 people for the ones who can't roll, and Delphine rolled with me because there's nobody else at 2 in the morning. It took us 4.5 hours because I wrote every one of them up properly. I found 4 things nobody had ever handed off to me. A shear tear on the left buttock on 205, healing, well managed, dressed by somebody who knew what they were doing. 2 pressure areas on 207's heels, both of them stage 1, both blanching, and 207's a woman who kicks her boots off. So somebody had started padding the footboard instead, which is smart and which is nowhere in anything I'd ever read. A moisture injury on Mr. Bose. I'd have caught myself if I'd been on the haul the week it started. And a bruise on 210's forearm in the shape of a hand, which I asked about, and which Delphine said immediately and without any hesitation came from her, from a transfer on the 14th, where the woman went down on her and she grabbed. She'd reported it. It was reported. I checked and it was. Every one of those 4 had been taken care of. That's what I could not get past. Somebody had seen each one and done the right thing about it, and then that somebody had gone home to Evansville or Peru or wherever. And the next person had come in and found it and also done the right thing. And none of them had ever spoken to each other, and none of it had ever landed anywhere it stayed. At 10 till 6, I was still writing. The 6 o'clock pass is 60-some scheduled medications across 11 people, and it does not slide, because half of them are before breakfast, and breakfast comes up at 7. I asked Delphine to start it. She's a CNA. She cannot pass medications. I knew that when I said it, and I said it anyway. And here is exactly what I said, because I've gone over it. I said, "Would you get started? I'll be right behind you." She said, "All right." She didn't hesitate, not for a second. That's the part that should have told me, and it didn't, because I was tired and behind, and I had 4 skin assessments to finish before day shift. The following Thursday, I stayed on the hall the whole night on purpose, and at 4 in the morning, I went into the soiled utility to get rid of a bag. And Delphine was in there, sitting on the step stool with her shoes off. She's been in that building 9 years. She's got a son at home, 31, who had a wreck at 19 and needs somebody in the house, and she works nights because her sister's there days. I knew all that. Everybody knew all that. She's got a chair she parks by the linen cart outside 210, and she is in it every night I have ever worked in that building, and I had walked past that chair probably 1,000 times. I asked her how many nurses she's worked with on C since October. She counted on her fingers and then stopped counting and said she didn't know. 6 maybe. Then she said 7. And then she said, "Well, some of them only the one time." I asked her if anybody had ever told her what was going on with the schedule. And Delphine explained it to me the way you'd explain the ice maker. There's the paper in the cabinet, which is the real schedule. Everybody knows that. And then there's the app, which is the other schedule. And the app doesn't know about the paper. And she said when the app one goes empty, they don't fix it. Somebody claims it, and then they don't come. And nobody tells the building. And at 7 o'clock, there's no nurse. I asked how many times. She said she couldn't give me a number. She said it happens. She said, in the tone of a woman describing the weather in a state she has always lived in, that it happens. I asked her who passes the 9 o'clock on those nights. And she looked at me for a while, and then she said, "Well, 4 logins. That's the other half of it." And she had that too. The nursing director, who died in February, had set up 4 generic logins for the med system back when agency people were coming in faster than credentials could clear, so they could work while the paperwork caught up. Nobody ever turned them off. Everybody's got them written on the inside of the cart drawer. I used one myself my first 3 weeks in that building, when I transferred over from the place in Cannleton and my access hadn't come through. And I passed medications under a login that had somebody else's initials on it and thought nothing about it at all, because my DON told me to and because the alternative was 11 people not getting their heart pills. So on a night when nobody came, the 9 o'clock still got passed. And the system that would tell you who passed it can only tell you that one of 4 unnamed accounts did. I sat down on the floor of a soiled utility room across from a woman with her shoes off, and I looked at the shelf beside her head. And there was the tub of barrier cream, the big one, and on the lid in marker were the letters DM. I'd been wiping that cream off my aunt's ankle bone for 4 months. Every version of that dressing, every different way of taping, every nurse's hands, and underneath all of it the same finger-wide swipe in the same place. And I had never once wondered where it came from, because barrier cream on an ankle is the most ordinary thing in a building like that. The nurses changed. The cream didn't. I could have sent her home. I want to be honest that the thought I had was not a good one. What went through my head first was that I was standing on top of a thing that could end her, and that the ending of it would take about 1 sentence in the right room. What I did instead was finish the night behind her. I redid the 2 dressings she'd have done. I passed the 6 o'clock myself, all 60-some, and I signed all of it. And I stood at the cart while she brought me the cups. And I put the pills in them with my own hands, so that the night, as it exists anywhere, has me in it. That's the part where I stopped being a person who could report this. I want that on the record in my own words rather than somebody else's. I made a decision at 4 in the morning in a room that smells the way that room smells. And the decision was that whatever this was, I was going to be inside it with her, instead of outside it, looking at her. 2 weeks later, there was a surveyor in the building. She wasn't there for any of this. Somebody's family had complained about a fall in another hall, and the state comes when the state comes. And she was set up at a table in the conference room with a laptop and a rolling bag, doing what they do, pulling people one at a time. Sherry stopped me in the hall Thursday evening and said, "She wants to talk to you when you come on." She had the conference room, and she'd been in it 2 days already. And by then everybody in the building had been through once, so it wasn't a thing to be nervous about. Her name was Ms. Farrell. She had a laptop, a rolling bag, a bottle of water, and the tired politeness of somebody who does this in a different building every week. She asked me about the fall on the other hall, which I knew nothing about and told her so. She asked me about the call light response on C at night. She asked me how many residents, and I said 11, and she wrote it down. Then she asked how many nurses she'd find if she pulled the last 90 days of 9 o'clock passes on Hall C. I said I couldn't tell her that. She didn't react at all. She asked it a different way, which is what they do. And it wasn't a trick. She was just working. She asked me to walk her through my own nights. Which ones were mine? And that's where it came apart, because I could not answer that. That's the thing I want to be exact about. I wasn't refusing yet at that point. I genuinely could not tell her which nights were mine. I could tell her Thursdays, since the end of January, because I'd claimed those on my own phone. Before that, I had 4 months of nights I believed I'd worked, and no way to separate them from the nights I'd been sent home at the door, because I'd never written any of it down. Because why would you write down that you went to work? She said, "All right." Then she asked if anybody else had been passing medications on that hall. The room was warm. There was a window unit going even though it was March. She had her hands on either side of the laptop, and she was waiting the way people wait when they've asked a question they already half know the shape of. And I understood exactly what she was holding out to me. Give her one name and a date, and the whole thing turns into an investigation with a subject. That's how it works. It has to have somebody's name on it, or it isn't a finding. It's an observation about staffing. And observations about staffing go into a report that a company reads in another state. Delphine has a son at home who was 19 when it happened and is 31 now. I said the credentials used on that hall were mine. She looked up. She asked me what I meant by that. I said there are shared logins on the med system in that building. They were set up before I ever got there. And I have used one. I said anything passed under my credentials is mine to answer for. I told her about the 4 accounts and where they're written and why they were made, and that the woman who made them is dead. Every word of that was true, and I gave her all of it. She asked me again, patiently, who else had been on that hall at night. I said I can't sequence it. She asked a third time, in a slightly different way, whether there had been unlicensed staff involved in medication administration. I said I can't sequence it. That was the whole thing. That was the decision, and it doesn't look like one. There's no moment in it. I sat in a warm room and answered every clinical question she asked me in as much detail as she wanted. She asked about 207's heels, and I gave her 10 minutes on 207's heels, the padding, the boots she kicks off, the blanching, what I'd written and when, and every time she came at the schedule, I gave her 5 words. I watched her stop writing about halfway through and start listening to the shape of it instead of the content. I know what that looked like from her side. It looked like a nurse protecting somebody, and I was. And I had also just made myself the only nameable person in the file. She thanked me. She said somebody would be in touch. She meant it kindly. It took a while. That's the part nobody tells you about. It isn't a hearing with a gavel, it's a certified letter. And then a phone call. And then months. The finding that came out of the building was about credentials sharing and medication administration documentation. Not about the hall. Not about the block posting itself every Sunday. And not about a supervisor calling people off to avoid paying twice. Because none of that is a violation of anything. Coverage on Hall C was found adequate. 11 residents, 1 licensed nurse per shift, which is exactly what there was, every single night that anybody could establish. They pulled the shared logins the week after she left. Everybody had to reset. It took 3 days and made everyone furious, and it was the right thing to do. My license went. I don't want to make it sound like it was taken from me in a room somewhere by people who enjoyed it. I had a lawyer for part of it. He told me early on that if I could produce a schedule of my own nights, most of it went away. And I couldn't. And after a while, he stopped asking. Surrender in lieu of. That's the language. You sign it, and it means you can't do the work anymore. And it means nobody has to prove anything about what happened on Hall C between October and March. Delphine kept her job. I've never told her that was a thing that had to happen, and I never will. And I'm aware that not telling her is its own kind of arrangement. My last night was a Saturday. Nobody made anything of it. I did the pass, I did the turns, I did 2 dressings, and at about 5:45 I found her in the hall with a linen cart, and I told her. I gave her Verna. That's what it was, and we both knew it, and neither of us used a word bigger than the ones I'm about to write. I said Mr. Bose won't take the 9 o'clock without applesauce, and there's never any on the cart. And she said she knows. She brings it up. I said Verna won't ring, ever, so somebody has to go in whether the light's on or not. I said her water goes on the left because her right shoulder won't come up. I said leave the door open about 4 inches, not all the way, because all the way she can see the hall light, and she thinks it's morning, and she gets up. Delphine said, 4 inches. I said about 4 inches. She said, all right, Ray. That's it. That's the entire conversation, in a hallway at 5:45 in the morning. And it was the most important thing I have ever handed to another human being. 6 weeks later, Ronnie called me. She got my number off Kay, who got it off somebody, and she called on a Tuesday afternoon while I was sitting in a truck that finally had an alternator in it, in the lot of a place in Tell's City, where I'd put in for a warehouse job. She said she wasn't calling to be strange about it. She said she'd picked up a block over at the other building the company runs, out toward the county line, 40 minutes from here. A place I have never set foot in. She said the same recurring night block was posted there. Sundays, 7 to 7, 2nd floor. And she'd claimed it. And when she opened it to look at the details, there was a line on it for the standing nurse. She said it had my name in it, R. Delacroix. She said she figured it was from when they renumbered the units that things get carried over. And she was probably right. I think she was right. I think somebody built that posting off a template. Of a posting off a template. And my name rode along inside it the way a name rides along inside a form. And there is nobody in that company who has ever heard of me. I drove out there anyway. I got there a little before 7 in the evening, which is shift change. And I parked across the road with the truck facing the building because I wanted to see the 2nd floor. It's a newer building than ours. Brick down low, siding up top, a covered drive with a bench under it, and somebody's family standing out there having the conversation families have in a covered drive. The 2nd floor windows started coming on the way they do, not all at once, in the order somebody walks a hall. I sat there for maybe 40 minutes, and I could not tell you what I was expecting to see. A person, I guess. Somebody walking in a door. Then I called the front desk. The number's on the sign. A woman answered on the second ring and said the name of the building. I asked for the nurse on the second floor. She said, "Sure, hang on, honey." I could hear the desk sounds. Somebody laughing further off, a printer, that hollow room sound. I sat with the phone against my ear and watched the windows on the second floor, and I want to be plain about what I did next, because it was the only thing I actually came out there to do. I said, "Her name is Delacroix." There was about a second of nothing. Then she came back on, cheerful, already half turned towards something else in the room with her. And she said, "Oh, she's in a room right now. Can I take a message?"